Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you so much for joining, and I'm particularly grateful to Dr. Soleri and the rest of the staff for taking time out to be here and look at the governance program that I, along with my mentor and supervisor, Professor Jefford, who is emeritus professor at University of Bath, conceived. But that time it was too early, perhaps, to implement this program, and it gotten delayed for various reasons. But I think it is a very important issue in Pakistan, and something which is very close to my heart. So I thought, let's just pick this program once again and share this program with you, which I consider has to be an SDPI governance program. These are the table of contents that I'll be going through, taking more time down below where I'll be discussing state of governance reports and modalities and methods, inception phase, etc. But let me just give you a brief background of why there is a need for embarking upon a comprehensive research strategy in SDPI, trying to address governance challenges in Pakistan. And the next is the rights and efficiency case of good governance. Why do we propose this particular kind of governance program? And then marginalization of state in Pakistan, interacting with state, access and delivery. And then I'll go through the rest of the contents. And then obviously towards the end we would look at some feedback and comments from you. So the rationale is, as we all know, governance remains the core problem in Pakistan, and which is widely accepted in Pakistan and across several countries, and particularly by successive governments as well as citizens and donors. We have lots of programs and projects and funding which are directed toward governance, but which remains a central problem in Pakistan, as we see governance deeply affect the state and society, particularly when you look at the political aspects of governance. It is directly associated with politics, which undermines access to service delivery, and particularly state institutions, and also the relationship between the state and society. So it doesn't really affect the state per se, but also affect the society. It also involves empirically looking into the structural and systemic issues by paying specific attention to the motivations and relationships and the everyday practices of state officials and non-state actors. So governance is not strictly a very normative agenda where you look at normatively transparency, accountability, but rather it is more of a structural issue which is deeply embedded in how the state actually operates and how society actually operates. So I'm implying to porous boundaries and interpenetration of informal practices into the state practices, and that's why it's construed the official provision of provision as well as governance interventions in the country. So in a nutshell, both private market and public sector is deeply affected by governance, which is a pervading reality in Pakistan. Now let's just look at the rights and efficacy case for good governance. Why do we propose a governance program? So the first element of this proposition is the agenda of good governance, as we all know, is a precondition for improved distributive and accountable governance. Now, this is an important stance which all the donor agencies, and particularly the Pakistan, take. Then until we have good governance, we are not able to have a democratic governance in Pakistan. We will not have accountable institutions, and it's rather a precondition. So you cannot really aspire for something of good governance by looking at rent-seeking behavior and corruption, and wait for such time that you address the endemic issues and then try to achieve the good governance agenda. But rather, this agenda should come first, and when you fix the problem of governance, you should be able to have improved governance in Pakistan, or particularly in Pakistan we're talking. So if we adopt a rights perspective alongside an efficiency one, then the problems of governance undermines rights and entitlements of ordinary citizens. Now there is a minute group of economists, Mushtaq Khan, as he talks about, he takes a different stance. He argues that governance takes the problems of governance alongside with economic growth, and both rent-seeking behavior, corruption, they go alongside rather than precedes. But that's a minority. But if you want to argue for rights and efficiency, then I think it's definitely a good governance agenda, which particularly undermines the rights and entitlements. So we have to pursue this particular agenda rather than waiting for institutions to improve alongside corruption and endemic practices. So rent-seeking behavior and practices across public and private sector therefore restrict entrepreneurship in Pakistan, employment opportunities for citizens, and also under the theme of decent work conditions. I don't want to spend too much time on it because this would all come out in a proposal. So if I spend more time on this, it is going to take a long time. So let me just restrict myself to these statements, and if there are questions, I can explain. And rent-seeking and corruption also adversely affect education and health services, infrastructure, and justice in Pakistan. So this is the case, rights and efficacy case for good governance. The second is the rights and efficacy case, which continues. All of these services are essential for long-term inclusive development, enabling a deepening of democracy and citizens. This is very much of a literature which will go into the proposal. So thus contributing to the public goods of law and order and conflict reduction. That's why we are arguing for that governance needs to be looking into a rights and efficacy case. And the problem of governance therefore require a strong and a degree of self-awareness and self-reflection in the pursuit of solutions. Now let's look at some other entity, which is the marginalization of state in Pakistan. If some of you were there in my Friday seminar, we talk about how the problems of legitimacy arises in the service sector of Pakistan. Now, the problem of governance is rather more complex. It is not simply a matter of you try to give more resources to the government, resulting in improved efficiency. So this demand and supply side of equations is rather misconstrued. It's rather not properly understood. Rather, it's endemic. It's morally endemic into how the society and the state actually operates, which affects the everyday life of the people. Let me give you an example. When you in SLRC project, even the resources were improved in Swat, but still the people were unsatisfied with the services. The reason for that was it's not about more resources, is rather about how people perceive governance, how people are affected by the everyday practices of state officials, how the state actually operates, which affects the people, rather than a very mechanistic kind of argument that the money is not properly spent. Yes, that could be an argument, but it is more about how people, the everyday lives of the people, when they pursue their livelihoods, they get affected by governance, which is rather than a deeply structured phenomena, obviously influenced by loyalties, kinship relations, informal relationships and practices, ethnicities and class structures. So the presently pervasive level of conflict, for example, violence and disorder in Pakistan is constituted by two particular reasons: inequality and social exclusion. So if you look at the bigger picture here, the state with all its symbols, we talk about rights and rights and entitlements and justice and fairness, is basically the state is rather marginalized. The people do not trust the state as an entity, as a protector of citizens, as a provision of services. Rather, people create mistrust about the state. Let's just look at the interacting with the state. So how do we really interact with the state? And that interaction is when you try to acquire access to social services and delivery. So a number of governance problems continuously undermine social policies, functioning of state institutions and service provision. In sharp contrast to broad-based social services, the state actually operates in patron-client relationships. So I know someone through which I have to get access to services, and ordinary citizens have to rely on informal networks in order to access state services. So it is not a state which is operates on without these kind of problems that you encounter on when you try to access services. So it is more of a clientelistic provision of services, restrictive access, patron-client forms of behavior, which undermines the access to service delivery. Thirdly, major obstacles in achieving the objectives of service delivery are bureaucratic indifference. Now, what do we mean by this? When you try to approach a bureaucrat or an official, he or she will try to guide you through either official rules or try to delay your service with some kind of particular reason that you would not try to agree with, and sometimes their behavior is of really indifference, and that discourages citizens when they try to formally access services in the state as it is. And obviously there is a problem of functioning of institutions in a more transparent manner, in a more accountable manner. So governance problems are further complicated by various forms of brokerage. You have brokers in the state, you have brokers in the lower services of the state, in a decentralized governance system, and you obviously have intermediation when somebody else tries to mediate between you and the state. For example, I may call on a particular personality in order to access a government license. I may also rely on my networks, on my other relationships in order to access state institutions. So governance is rather, as I've already mentioned, it gets affected by interactions and intermediation of non-state actors. Citizens have lost faith. I've read a number of reports on governance so far, and in my PhD in what I saw in SLRC and what I'm witnessing right in the Planning Commission project when I go to different districts, is the citizens have lost trust in state institutions, and we have scarce resources which are captured by rent seeking and kinship ties and social political connections. So these are some of the deeply embedded problems of Pakistan, which affects governance in various manner. So SDPI, looking at all that background, should embark upon an ongoing research program, try to address governance problems by looking at certain themes with intention of producing annually state of governance reports. State of governance report, SDPI can look at the example of Institute of Governance Studies, IGS, in Dhaka. They have produced 6-7 reports so far. They are very good quality reports, and the method they adopt is they select a theme on which they produce a governance report each year. So each year the governance theme changes. And there are various themes on which IGS produces governance reports. Each year, a team of experts and researchers gather at IGS for undertaking research on governance, as I've already mentioned. So this is a good model that SDPI, I'm not necessarily saying that they should emulate, but we should look at this model, and I think it's a good model to adopt with certain changes. It doesn't have to be the same model. We can obviously tweak it, twist it, and according to our own requirements. SDPI can have two processes to embark upon governance reports. The production of an initial overview report, surveying the relevant literature and establishing an overall theoretical basis as to why we are embarking upon a governance research agenda. And the development of the first initial analysis, a series of proposed thematic reports should be produced at least for the period 2020 and 25. It could be more, it could be less, but at least there should be a continuous effort in SDPI to produce these reports, which can become flagship events, flagship reports of the institute. And if you want to take a longer term review, then we could also engage with provincial governance reports, and in each province the dynamics of access to services, the dynamics of service delivery, political landscape and structures, they vary. So we can have different provincial governance reports. Once we have an overarching federal government report, then we can have a provincial government report. So this would lead to a continuous effort of producing these reports even at the provincial level, and you can go down to district levels. So what should be the modalities and methods? As I've already mentioned, IGS model can be reviewed depending on what theme we select for the first governance report. The foremost task of a project leader is to hire local research staff with requisite skills in social sciences particularly, and doing some preliminary work on producing the first theme or the thematic area of the governance report. The local team should be assisted by technically with some foreign consultants, because I believe it's a difficult endeavor to produce a high quality governance report with the existing team that we have in SDPI. I'm not saying it cannot be done. It can be done. But I think looking at the capacity of SDPI and for the future capacities, I think it will be a good idea to have technical consultants on board. The first report on the state of governance report will be an overarching one, considering potential areas to be considered for later governance reports. So how do we go about this theme? There are some preliminary activities. The first one is should be an opening introductory workshop in which we would invite donors, we would invite policy elites, we would invite different people to whom we will present our governance agenda. And among other participants, of course, an advisory group should be constituted. And this group would particularly give inputs on the first report and then subsequent reports. So you already would have a core advisory group who would continuously give inputs on your thematic papers, and also they can also become your peer reviewers. A participant of the advisory group would be governance and policy experts. They should have in-depth knowledge of policy, social policy, and political issues. And the group can range from, members of the group can range from 5 to 8. The core governance team at SDPI would implement the program from December 2019. Why December 2018? Because from September to November, the team supported from University of Bath. I have been in touch with University of Bath, and they have granted support to be part of the team, advising us on initial schemes, scoping papers, gathering preparation of scoping papers, and obviously contributing to the first theme of this report. And then in the first half of 2020, draft chapters would be produced with inputs from University of Bath. Following internal and external peer reviews, expert chapters, the first State of Governance report would be published and launched in the SDC of SDPI in 2020. Now, in the preparation of first governance report, Professor Jeff Ward would be basically advising the advisory inputs, giving us advisory input from the development studies at University of Bath. Professor Jeff Ward is also my PhD supervisor and my mentor, and he has an extremely good understanding of governance issues in Pakistan, and he had been extensively involved in the IGS governance reports in Bangladesh. And Professor Joe Devine, who heads the Department of Social Policy right now at University of Bath, has extensive theoretical knowledge and practical issues of poverty and governance and social policies. So these two particular professors are willing to provide guidance, are willing to provide support in the production of the first. And then when there is sufficient capacity within SDPI, SDPI does not have to rely on foreign consultants. It can have its own way of producing these reports within Pakistan, or it can change the University of Bath to University of Oxford and Cambridge. So this kind of arrangement can also rotate from university to university. It doesn't have to University of Bath. These are some of the research methods that we would be employing. Secondary sources, ethnographic studies, extremely important. NGO monitoring and evaluation report, as well as other studies in books, journals, reviews, and newspaper. Website analysis, court proceedings, obviously depending on the theme that we select. Data generated through key informant interviews, focus group discussions, and from across different sections of the society. People, some use of proposal surveys, case studies, and triangulation of draft papers and peer reviews would be consulted. One critical area which I haven't seen in SDPI, I might have not seen it, is reflexivity and participatory learning that you learn while you are doing research, because many practices of state officials, informal practices, service provision cannot be theoretically explained. You need to reflect on them when you gather notes, when you try to observe a particular phenomena. So in this particular thematic areas, I think this is an extremely crucial area which has not been done before. Now there has to be an inception phase. How do we go about the first report? While pursuing governance agenda, it's important that we look at the framework. North, who is a Nobel laureate, along with others, natural and limited access states. According to North, the limited access state is, it's characterized by progress. Pakistan is a limited access state, is rather than a natural state with politicized governments and all that. Now, conversely, open access state is characterized by political and economic development, viable civil society, which we all want in Pakistan. We all aspire for Pakistan, a more decentralized governance units, and impersonal social relationships. This framework is extremely useful to deconstruct political behavior and practices, and also a transition that why Pakistan, what kind of political conditions and institutions and framework required for Pakistan to transit from a natural state, which it is right now, having all those attributes that I have just talked about, towards a more open and its access transparent states. It's a difficult framework, but it can be pursued. Obviously, you need to do background readings and. Funding opportunities. The initial proposal on governance agenda is there, which can be revised based on your feedback and comments and updated. Full-fledged proposal would be developed along with budget details, and it would be shared with formally or informally with potential donors. We think that the first governance report should be funded by the IDRC grant to SDPI. Long-term funding can be secured through a consortium of funders, because it requires a sustained funding. This project is not a one-time project; it rather is a continuous funding. So a consortium is a good way of securing funding. Some of the sources obviously are UNDP, DFID, World Bank, ADB. And we can also approach the government. I'm sure the government would be very interested. What kind of support we can surely secure, a support towards this agenda from the government. But funding opportunities can also be explored. Thank you, and your feedback and comments.